Welcome everyone to our third session of this third day of our virtual summit on AgTech. We are continuing with our topic of AgTech in international countries, and who better to talk about this than the COO of Indigo, one of the largest AgTech companies that are currently operating in the world. So Karsten Neuffer is with us and he will talk us. So all yours, Karsten, you can share your screen.
All right. Thank you very much, Alberto. So I hope everybody can see my screen now.
Again, yeah, hello. It's working.
It's working. Thanks. Great. Look, it's a pleasure to be here today and have a chance to talk to you about AgTech expansion to international geographies in a virtual setting. Now, it's very unusual to talk to such a large audience and not see the audience actually, but I understand you at least can see me a little bit on a small picture at the bottom. As Alberto said, my name is Karsten Neuffer. I'm COO for Indigo. With that, also responsible for our international operations. And I'll talk a bit more about what it includes. I have about 15 years of experience in agriculture. I had various global and regional roles. For the most part, I lived in Europe as I'm German by nationality, but I also lived for about 4 years in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and am now living in Boston in the US. So again, pleasure to be here with you today. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I will briefly introduce Indigo and talk about Indigo. I will also share some perspectives about agriculture, and then I will conclude with 3 specific examples for international expansion, and then some key takeaways, and then I'm open up for any questions that you have at the end. So Indigo, we are a now company with a mission, and the mission is to harness nature to help farmers sustainably feed the planet. We want to achieve this by basically focusing on 3 things. First, we want to focus on improving farmer profitability. Secondly, and equally important, we want to focus on the environment and improve the sustainability of agricultural production. And thirdly, we also want to focus on the consumer by better aligning the agricultural practices with what the consumer demands are. So that's pretty much shaping everything we do at Indigo. And with that mission, we have been founded in 2014, so we are a relatively young company still. We have been very successfully growing in the last almost 6 years now, been successful in fundraising. We have about 1,000, slightly more than 1,000 employees right now. And we have now expanded our international operations and have now 6 locations around the world that you can see here on the left side. We're headquartered in Boston and have the presence in Argentina, Brazil. We have a joint venture in India. European headquarters are based out of Basel, and our US operations are led out of Memphis. Let me just start by talking a little bit about our perspective on agriculture. Look, and most of you, of course, know this, but agriculture is probably the world's most important industry. Now, the invention of agriculture has likely enabled the emergence of human civilization when it all started. Today, agriculture employs roughly 40% of the global workforce. It covers half of the habitable land on Earth. And it probably protects us against more diseases than any other healthcare innovation out there, right? So the food that is produced and the food that we consume is really valuable in protecting us against most of the diseases. Also, and now this is now more specific probably to the theme of the last 3 days, agriculture is probably still today the largest industry where platform business models and new AgTech business models have not yet fundamentally changed the industry. But it certainly will. Now, and as you see here on the slide, pretty much every other industry has had new players coming in, new companies that propel digital technologies and new business models that have emerged across pretty much all of the other major industries, except agriculture, and obviously except until now. And now this is the space where we want to play at Indigo, and I guess now many of the other companies that have presented over the last 2-3 days or have been talking panels are focusing on that same highly attractive and very, very big industry out there. So I'm curious to see many other players emerging there as well. To add to some of the challenges now, the existing agricultural technologies are not always working hand in hand with the environment. Some of them often detrimental to the environment. Now, I'm sure you have also talked about land degradation that we see now almost 25 million acres per year. Now water is short. Now we're using roughly 30% more fresh water than the planet can replenish. There's lots of nitrogen runoff into the rivers, into freshwater oceans, lots of pesticide residues on the food. And of course, agriculture is also often frequently cited as contributing up to 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore a major cause of climate change. Now, in the absence of new technology innovation, and that lack of technology innovation so far has led to some significant challenges, right? We are seeing unprecedented atmospheric CO2 levels in the atmosphere that are driving climate change. Demand for food is often outpacing our ability to supply it. Our largely commodity-based food system is not always meeting exactly what consumers want and what consumers demand. And then as last but not least, profit levels for farmers are often declining, and those low grower profit levels are probably not sustainable the way we see it right now. So a whole range of problems. Now, I believe these problems are solvable, but they require systems innovation. And our take on that now is, as long as we pay farmers to produce commodities, then often they lack the incentives to adopt their individual technologies and practices that improve the food quality and the food sustainability. However, if we were to pay farmers to produce products that consumers and buyers actually want by decommoditizing agriculture, then our belief is that the industry will change more rapidly. Now, and one of the ways to help farmers produce products that consumers want is to produce products that also have a low carbon footprint. And for that reason, at Indigo, we've launched pretty much a year ago or so the Teraton Initiative, which is a global effort to remove roughly 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and not just remove that from the atmosphere, but also use that to enrich our agricultural soils. So that's a global initiative that we've launched, which we're hoping to partner with many, many other companies who have a similar objective in mind. Why do we believe that is important? Well, it's because based on a belief that agricultural sequestration is probably the only scalable, affordable, and immediate solution out there to sustainably remove CO2 from the atmosphere, right? Of course, carbon also gets sequestered in trees, but that might not be as affordable and as immediate. And it can also get sequestered in oceans, but similarly, might not be affordable and certainly not immediate. But agriculture has that ability to be really scalable, really affordable, and very immediate use. And so with that, it's not just an opportunity to sequester carbon back from the atmosphere, but it's also an opportunity to turn agriculture from being perceived as actually part of the CO2 problem to becoming a cornerstone of the solution to climate change. And the good news is, a small percentage of farmers are already doing this. Now, what we would call regenerative practices is not yet widely adopted, but it is adopted. We have now done some extensive research with many, many scientists. You see here roughly 5 typical practices that help to enrich carbon in soils, to plant cover crops, use no-till farming, rotate crops, for example. And now overall 1% of US farmers have adopted 3 or more of them already. So that's one of the approaches that we are pursuing. Now, there's other elements that we believe are necessary for that systems innovation to address many of the problems that we're facing in agriculture at the moment. So at Indigo, we are focusing on marketplaces that enable growers and buyers to interact directly and complemented with some selected crop production solutions. So we have 3 marketplaces that we've created over the last 24 months that are now up and running. One is focused on grain, so a grain marketplace that allows growers and buyers to come together for more healthy and more nutritious grains. We have Indigo Transport, which is a marketplace that allows then to bring again together growers with buyers for that last piece of transportation necessary to ensure that the grain is delivered with identity preservation and traceability to that buyer. We have Indigo Carbon, which not only helps farmers to sequester carbon in the soil and generate a carbon credit, but to also then help sell those carbon credits to the buyers. And then on the crop production side, we have microbial products. That was pretty much where Indigo was founded on in 2014. We have since then complemented it also with digital agronomy, and we have also created a egg financing solution, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a bit. So let me shift now here more specifically to international expansion. So now I think you have a bit of a sense on what it is that we're focusing on. And I wanted to make sure that kind of sets the basis a bit for some of the examples that I will use to illustrate what some of the challenges and opportunities are for international expansion. We have started to expand internationally by opening offices in 2017, first in Argentina and Australia, have then subsequently expanded to Brazil, to India, only very recently in Europe, and of course are planning further geographic expansions also in the future. What we typically do is we test our business models and our new technology ideas first in the US, as we're a US-based company, to make sure we have that proof of concept and the confidence that this model will work, and then we'll roll it out. So we have done this with our microbial seed treatment that is currently available in all geographies. We are next with rolling out Marketplace, our grain marketplace in Brazil. Carbon is obviously a great opportunity for Europe because of the tailwinds there. And Egg Finance we have successfully piloted in the last season already in Brazil. And whenever we do that, we're tailoring those global technology platforms that we're building to the local agricultural context, different crop rotations, different agricultural practices, different farm sizes. And why is that important? Well, because that diversity of global agriculture that we see everywhere, of course, that poses different local challenges, but also different opportunities. And now this is just an illustration of the huge variety and diversity that we obviously see every day in agriculture, ranging from India on the left as an example of smallholder agriculture, where often farmers are farming on 1 hectare or less. That's about 2 football fields. So challenges are that smallholder market complexity and therefore the reach and to all these farmers to really acquire some scale. Opportunities are, of course, that in most of those areas, there's a relatively low yield. So there's an opportunity to improve the yields. Shifting to Europe, now farm size on average gets a little bit bigger, now maybe 120 football fields, but of course with a huge variation depending on the various different countries there. While in India, there's a lot of rice and many, many other local crops. In Europe, there's a lot of wheat. Challenges are country fragmentation of Europe, regulatory environment. But then on the opportunity side, particularly for regenerative agriculture and carbon, there's a lot of government and public tailwinds as that topic is really top of mind for everybody. And then going to Latin America, now that's probably the where you can find the biggest farm sizes. Now 4,000 football fields is not even a big one. Now there are farm sizes 100,000 hectares and more. It's amazing if you stand on one of those fields and you literally can see the earth bend at the end of the horizon, and it's just soybeans wherever you look. So here, some of the challenges are farmers' access to financing, much of the political and economic volatility that particularly Brazil and Argentina have to deal with. On the opportunity side, big farmers are of course easier to scale, and it's a relatively advanced agricultural industry with lots of interest in new technologies. So I'll now go a bit in detail into each of those 3 continents and give you one example each on what we have done in terms of international expansion, and then we'll summarize some of the learnings. So in India, now our challenge was really how can we bring our vision of that required systems change to Indian smallholder farmers. Again, as I just said before, it's a big agricultural country, and I think you just had a panel on India, so I don't need to spend too much time here. But 160 million hectares of land, 260 million farmers, 100 million of those are considered to be marginal farming on 1 hectare land or less. But also around 170,000 points of retailers in every small farm village. And so here now, our key focus was how can we focus on smallholders, on those rural villages and those rural communities in order to create a win-win for all. Now, the solution to that, faced with such a challenge, is to partner, right? So we have created a joint venture that we called Grow Indigo, which we established in 2017, solely to dedicated to improve the Indian farmer livelihoods through innovation that both parties of that joint venture can bring. And we partnered with Mahiko. Now, Mahiko is probably the leading local seed company in India, which exactly brings to the table what we are missing, which is the local reach, the trust with the farmers, trusted brand and robust relationships, and also a bit of microbial technology. And we are bringing our microbial technology and digital expertise and innovation. And that has been really fruitful. It's been a great partnership so far. We've also been testing some of our microbial innovation developed in the labs here in Boston in Indian fields. And you see some of that on the graphic on the left here. That has generated in cotton between 5 and 20% yield increase. And each of those bars is a different product that we've tested. So those have been really successful results that we're looking forward to bring to farmers in India. And then we have, of course, also are focusing on bringing our marketplaces, our technology platforms to India with a huge amount of local tailoring. Grow Online is a marketplace for agricultural inputs. Grow Mandi would be the marketplace for grain. And we're working on ag insurance topics, and carbon, of course, is a big opportunity as well. Moving on to LATAM. Now here, we've been faced with a very, very different challenge when we look to how best operate in LATAM. Here we found that financing is a key enabler to support farmers. Now, when you ask farmers what is their biggest concern, then top of the list is the access to credit. That's really top of mind for most of the farmers. And while in the US and in Europe, typically such credit and financing is provided by financial institutions, they struggle to operate in Latin American markets. Understanding the agricultural dynamics, they find difficult. Commodity price risk is something they're not used to. Commodity production risk, commodity marketing risk. So it's full of risks. And so financial institutions are not as easily providing access to that credit need. And as a consequence, there's limited access to capital in the market. It's full of unnecessary bureaucracy. Much of the credit is over-collateralized. Often there's a misperception of the real underlying risk. And when farmers do get access to credit, it typically comes at very unattractive rates and high transaction costs. So our solution here, understanding that situation, we have created Indigo Egg Financing. as an innovative and digitally enabled platform, again, that provides benefits for both growers and investors. So we have pretty much digitalized the process for providing farm inputs in exchange for a barter operation, in exchange for grain. And with that, we have created a vehicle where investors can invest directly in the underlying grain production in Brazil. And that has a whole range of benefits that you can see at the bottom here. So growers get more competitive interest rates, a much simplified process with much faster credit approval, lots of transparency on both sides, flexibility, access to technology. We're also providing some crop insurance with that. And the investors, of course, have a attractive risk-reward ratio. They get that direct exposure to ag. So their investment is not in Indigo, but it's directly into the farmers. We ensure best crop input quality to maximize the chances of a successful growing crop. And we have a very tight monitoring process, which ensures that the risks are mitigated in the right way. So that's Latin America. And last but not least, Europe. And it's, again, a very different market. So I've selected one example here to highlight an opportunity. Often regulatory environment is seen as a challenge in Europe, but when it comes to carbon, the European regulatory and governmental policies actually provide very strong incentives for low carbon economy. You might not see that well here on that slide because it's a very small print, but this shows the total global emissions covered with various governmental instruments. And you see that big green box at the bottom. That's approximately a third of the carbon traded in the world is part of the EU ETS, emission trading system. That's one opportunity. And the other fact on here on the very right, when it comes to really high prices, so the y-axis shows the prices of which carbon is traded on a per ton basis, then many of the European countries have here carbon-specific taxes at very high rates. Right? So when you're operating in Europe and you're trying to sequester carbon, then you're actually facing a very supportive environment with lots of tailwinds. So recognizing that, our solution here is that we are working actually with both the private and the public sector to create and finance soil carbon credits, because it always requires a bit of an investment, an upfront incentive for farmers to change some of their practices to agricultural practices, to regenerative practices. And of course, that financing does not only need to come from the private market, or voluntary markets, but particularly in Europe, now there's a big compliance market, there's other country public funds and EU funds. And you can see from the numbers here that those public available financing due to the public policies is a lot bigger than what is typically available in the private market. So we've put a particular focus on that area as well. And with that, I'll conclude and we'll have some time for questions. So my key takeaways basically from the last, not just 20 minutes, but from my career in agriculture so far, is agriculture is one of the most local industries in the world. So whenever we think about going into other markets, let's make sure we tailor the strategies, the products and the business models always to the specific local context. Secondly, in most countries, agriculture is actually the most important industry. And with that now comes a huge amount of innovation, local talent, which is clearly worth tapping into. And of course, the incentive to work not just with the private, but work with the private and public sector and leverage the assets there. Thirdly, system innovation, which is what we are after. We can't do that alone. That requires broad alliances. I think we're all trying to achieve that. So now, whenever possible, seek out partners, work together. I feel that's so critical in our industry. And then last but not least, local tailoring obviously is key, but at the same time, watch out for scalability and efficient use of resources, because too much tailoring can be the enemy of the scalability. And with that, Alberto, I guess back to you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Karsten. It was very helpful to see how you are present in different countries and how you tailor your strategy. So I have one first question, that is, what is your process for determining when to expand to a new country or region? How do you balance adding new geographies while also scaling in countries where you have already established business? And together with that, how do you move to other crops? Because you mostly talked about annual crops, those crops that you plant every year. What about permanent crops? Have you thought about that as well?
Okay, so that's a whole range of sub questions in there. So look, the process of deciding on when to expand is of course not an easy one, and I think now the question implies, rightfully so, that there's always a geographic component, there is a kind of business model component, and then there's also the element of now scaling once we're in a country. So we try to always think about, once we're in a country, how can we scale very fast as one focus, and then what are the other businesses that we want to take in a country, and then what are the other geographies. It's always important to get this balance right. So we go through a strategic process every year. We look at obviously the opportunity in a country and try to match that with the value proposition that our technologies can bring. I think it's very important to always keep in mind that we try to avoid pushing our technology to customers, but rather try to understand what are the respective local needs, what are the customer segments where we can really add value, and then balance that or test that, compare that with when do we really have a technology solution, a product ready that is fit for purpose and actually helps to address the specific local needs. So that is a process we go through. It's always a bit of a trade-off, and also sometimes it is a bit opportunistic. Once we are in a country, then of course we try to bring all our technologies together and leverage our existing infrastructure. It's a step-by-step process. To the last part of the question, are we expanding into other crops? Again, it's a question of focus. So for the time being, we have given ourselves the focus on the big row crops, on the big field crops. Again, selectively and in local markets, we test a bit left and right, not just to see also whether our technology is working. But no, we always, particularly where we are at a stage, want to make sure that we keep the focus narrow, we achieve the scale with where we are focusing on before we maybe too prematurely expand too fast.
Perfect, thank you. And well, we are running a little bit late, but we have time for a last question, which is, what is the variation in the range of carbon dioxide that sequestration as per geographies and soil ecologies can change with these 5 techniques that you initially said? What has been...
Okay, so I think if I understood the question is now, what is the carbon sequestration potential of the various regenerative practices? Now, so that is a question that we've been now asking and working on pretty much constantly for the last 12 months, and there's no clear answer yet, because now the science is not conclusive there. So we've been working together with a whole range of global scientists to exactly better understand that carbon sequestration potential, but no, it's never been resolved conclusively, also because there's a whole range of different ways that you can measure that. Typically, now science tells you that there's an opportunity, depending on the practices, to sequester from 1 ton per hectare all the way up to 7 tons and even more, 10 tons per hectare. When you work with some of the farmers and look at some of the farmers who have adopted those regenerative practices, they've often increased their carbon content in the soil from 0.5%, sometimes to 5%. So it really depends a lot on the existing practices, on the existing soil type. But now, as it's never been really tested, we believe there is a huge opportunity to sequester carbon in soil, and there is enough evidence out there in fields now where we've gone and tested that with farmers in scientific areas that we have explored, and also in the longer view, if you look at pre-industrial, pre-agricultural times, where the carbon in the soil was at much higher level, and a lot of the extra carbon that we find now in the atmosphere actually comes from that emission out of the soil.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Karsten, for your time. Since the beginning, when we started talking about this, it was very helpful to learn more about Indigo. And now we will keep exploring AgTech in international markets. So I encourage all our attendees to stay connected. Thank you very much, Karsten.
Thank you very much. Ciao, Alberto.
Ciao.